On, and according to GDPR, I ask you to be aware of recording, and we might be uploaded to the principal's website. So, as everyone is here, I'm glad to welcome all of you to the first seminar of our research group. And for today, we are discussing the research concepts. And what I have in mind is to share our ideas, all of us, in some 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will have some time for discussion and questions, and to have reactions to each other. Is that okay for you? Fine. And my idea was to go in alphabetic order, and I'd like to be the last one. So the first letter is O, so we should start with Marta. Marta, I can't pronounce your name properly. Osuchowska, is that correct? So Marta, the floor is yours. Do you have a PowerPoint presentation? We don't want to lose you again.
No, I'm here.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yes. No, I don't have a presentation.
That's fine. So the floor is yours.
So I'm starting?
Yes.
Okay. It's my camera is working now. Okay. It's working. Do you hear me? Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, but we just went mute.
Okay.
So you can start your presentation. There's some problem with the connection, I see. Connection seems to be very weak. We don't really follow you. What if we move on and we go back to Marta later? Is that okay? So then let's start with Adam.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's already my third research group within the Polish-Hungarian Research Platform. And we were members of the same groups within the previous two ones with Barbara Janus-Pol. Maybe some of you know her. And unfortunately, no one remained from those groups. But I hope that we will get closer to each other by these workshops, by these conversations. I have just realized that I really miss them. I miss those members of our previous groups. Now I'm going to summarize briefly my research concept in accordance with the suggested structures, methods, and research questions of my two papers, which must be prepared within the framework of our research. My first paper, that is my book chapter, is divided into three major parts. In part one, I highlight the most prominent areas of the contemporary international context, regardless of their importance in Hungary. In part 2, I provide some general background information on public employees in general, then about those who belong to the broadly interpreted public administration that consists both those who exercise public authority and those who provide only services, different public services. Then in part 3, I'm going to catalog all the categories of public administration employment, and because of the fact that the legal status of each of those categories is regulated by Parliament acts in Hungary, my first research question will try to reveal that which major elements of civil service, such as selection, appointment, remuneration, career, labor relations, content of the rights and obligations, or termination of service, do influence the freedom of conscience the more, if there is any influence at all. This undoubtedly requires a number of certain legal cases related to the practices of the Hungarian public administration to find out which areas are the most frequent ones from the perspective of the freedom of conscience. Just to summarize, I will undertake to compile a kind of a problem map. Freedom of conscience is a twofold phenomenon. On the one hand, it must be interpreted and evaluated from the perspective of the different categories of public employees, but on the other hand, also from the side of the clients or customers. A law or official action by a state official that restricts one's liberty to live in harmony with one's conscience would be a burden on the free exercise of conscience. Such a burden would not count as a violation of the right to freedom of conscience if the law or official action in question is necessary to serve a legitimate government interest. So the right to freedom of conscience is not absolute and exceptionless. It's one right to be balanced against others. But what if the person whose right to freedom of conscience is under a serious pressure is a public employee, for example, a cabinet civil servant? What are the specific circumstances to be taken into account, if there are any, when their right to freedom of conscience should be balanced against other rights? On the one hand, public service personnel are expected to be responsible to the control of democratically elected governments or self-local governments. And on the other hand, as the policy space becomes more complex, they are forced to exercise more discretion in their responsibilities, and their individual and professional conscience is seriously challenged under such pressures. So, getting to the heart of the matter, where are the moral, political, professional, and legal limits of the loyalty within public administration? To be more accurate, government employees and elected officials must fulfill basic obligations of public service and adhere to laws and regulations that provide equal opportunity regardless of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and so on. But parallelly, freedom of conscience is still a sensitive and in many aspects unsolved question, kind of a contested concept, both on the side of the service providers and consumers, mainly here in Hungary. The main question for ethics, law, theology, and other social sciences is whether it is possible, and if so, then how, to honor individual integrity and moral beliefs without harming those with different beliefs and values. To get closer to the core of the topic, I will try to examine the relationship of the freedom of conscience and freedom of expression, because those elements of freedom of conscience which are visible in the outside world, accessible to other people, are also to a significant extent linked to freedom of expression. What are the main aspects of that relationship? Mentioning just two of them, according to the first aspect, it's problematic and can cause serious disadvantages for the employer if the employee shares negative opinions about the employment relationship, and more specifically about the employer on social media, such as Facebook and others. In those cases, the balance is always tipped in one direction, the employee's freedom of expression, and in the other, the so-called duty of loyalty. The question is whether, and if so, to what extent the former can be limited in order to fulfill the latter. I will examine cases that provide a picture on the labor law treatment of opinions posted on social networking sites and the scope and extent of the protection that they enjoy under fundamental rights. According to the second aspect, we should examine the possibilities and limits of contradicting the instructions received by the employee from the employer. That is an administrative organ. The conflict between the constitutional commitment of the state in law enforcement and the right to freedom of conscience and the religion of the person acting is most acute when the member of the authority acting is required to enforce a norm which is in direct conflict with his or her own internal convictions. What if he does not agree, if he or she does not carry out the orders he or she has been given? Moreover, if I broaden the concept and the notion of public administration, doctors and teachers are also included in the staff of the public administration, and several new problems come up related to the conscience issue. For example, a question related to Hungarian teachers has been evolved. Does unjust conduct by the state, especially the limited right of teachers to strike, constitute a ground for unlawful civil disobedience of those teachers? What should be the legal consequences of such deeds? And that is exactly the topic what my second paper, my article, is aimed at. I'm going to point out some questions in my second paper related to the freedom of conscience of Hungarian teachers, such as the new legal environment, civil disobedience, strike, and the interests of the pupils. Why did I choose the teachers? Because of at least two reasons. One of those reasons is that one of the major sticking points of the current Hungarian legal life and politics as well is the issue I have mentioned. And on the other hand, the teacher is the representative of the adult conscience and ultimately of the social conscience, as Pincésné Dr. Palásti Ildikó mentions in one of her writings. Just some words about the method. What about the method used within those papers? The main method to approach my topic is the review of the relevant primary legal sources and secondary legal sources as well. Hungarian and international scientific literature explaining the primary sources, the legal practice, and also the elements, specific circumstances determining the broader social environment. So through these sources, almost all the main scientific questions can be answered. Consequently, my book chapter should be an introductory writing complementing or even replacing the Hungarian international scientific literature on that topic. And finally, I should say some words about the possible legal and non-legal solutions, the lega ferenda suggestions that will be added to both works. Both articles and all the presentations by November conducted by me will try to explore the concepts of conscience in theory and practice in the Hungarian context. It offers insights into how conscience can and perhaps must be both accommodated and supported more appropriately in the practice of the 21st century Hungarian public administration and service. My suggestions or even proposals will also seek answers to specific questions, such as, mentioning only some of them. Does the new Hungarian Act on the status of public education employees affect the field in question? The second one, would the new abuse reporting systems that employers will have to set up under a new Hungarian Act affect freedom of conscience in public administration? If so, how? How can the law be further developed, if appropriate? My third question is, or should be, as you can know, in January 2018, the Trump administration established the Conscience and Religious Freedom Division within the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights, with the explicit goal of intensifying the legal protection of religious and conscience objections in healthcare. Do we need anything like that in Hungary or in Poland? My fourth question should be, does the existence and equality of governmental consultative mechanisms influence somehow the freedom of conscience within the Hungarian public administration? And my last question here is, do ethics codes and standards of conduct of administrative authorities have any influence on the freedom of conscience of public employees or not? So these were my preliminary points, just to briefly summarize my research concepts, mainly my questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Adam, for the very interesting presentation. You mentioned how much you liked your previous research group. I do hope that you will like us by the end of this research. I really like that you opened up the topic, and there are lots of perspectives in your approach, and I'm very curious what answers you will find to the questions. So let's move on. I'm wondering if Marta is us. Oh, perfect.
I'm sorry, I have no idea what happened. I bought a new computer and I think I don't know how to use it.
Well, it's a problem with
my old computer. Yeah.
So Marta, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. So once again, good evening. At the first project meeting, we are discussing about our main research works. So therefore, I would like to briefly outline what I want to address in our project. The main objective of my research is to analyze the conscience clause in the military field, including with a particular focus of paramilitary groups, and the possibility of introducing a pharmaceutical conscience clause into the law, especially in Polish law. The research questions revolve around: does the conscience clause apply in laws covering members of paramilitary groups? What is the relationship between the possibility of exercising freedom of conscience in the military and in paramilitary groups? And can we conscience clause regulate the activities of a professional group of pharmacists? The main research area is the legal regulation of freedom of conscience and the military conscience clause, including the changes that have been introduced in relation to professional military service and paramilitary groups. In the area of the pharmaceutical conscience clause, legal proposals related to the attempt to introduce the legal solution into Polish legislation will be examined. Social and statistical research on this issue will also be examined. In the context of the military consciousness objection clause, research in two areas becomes legitimate. First, the professional army and military conscription in a situation of necessity for the defense of a homeland. An interesting aspect is the possibility of dismissal from military service only in cases where religion or professional principles are in conflict with the duties of the soldier performing military service. This means that exception can be based on objection of performing military service as such, but it's not possible to obtain exemption by invoking an objection of conscience to the participation in a specific armed conflict. In other words, the concession objection is supposed to relate to the performance of a particular type of functioning, being a soldier, and not to individual case of participation in a particular armed conflict. There is, of course, a pragmatic justification for such a solution. It's easier for commissions to check the conscript's affiliation to a particular religious group than to examine the validity of the arguments against a particular armed conflict. Hence, the legitimacy of the exclusion of selective concession objection in the case of conscripts has recently often been questioned in the contemporary academic literature. And even the possibility of invoking concession objection in the case of professional soldiers who consider a given war to be unjust has been postulated. It should be noted, however, that according to the Polish law, religious views do not protect one from the obligation to act for the homeland, and should be mobilization be declared or war break out. An interesting situation has been encountered in Germany this year, where a number of the soldiers have recently resigned from the military service, the professional military service, explaining this by the high probability for a winning armed conflict with Russia. These soldiers justify their rise with the Russian aggression against Ukraine and a possible escalation of this conflict. The military claim that they didn't expect that when they joined the army. And my second flaw regarding the pharmaceutical conscience clause. The pharmaceutical law does not include the term conscience clause, which would allow the refusal to sell a medicinal product of the grounds of conscience. At the same time, however, the Polish constitution provides for freedom of expression through and freedom of conscience. With a view to respecting the rights of the individual in the light of the fundamental laws such as a constitution, it seems appropriate to allow the possibility of a pharmacist refusing to sell, for example, contraceptive medicine invoking to the conscience clause, whereby to enterprise running a pharmacy in which such a situation occurs must ensure the sale of contraceptive medicines by another pharmacist. In a course of my research, I will analyze the opinion of the chief pharmaceutical inspector, Polish inspector, and the position of pharmacists and pharmacy students in relation to the consent clause. I will also take into account the practical aspect, for example, the opinion of citizens resulting from recent surveys. I will also analyze both topics, taking into account international law, including the jurisprudence of the international tribunals. My research will allow for the coordination of measures, including the use of those with positive results in practice. The research may also contribute to the discussion of the comprehensive regulation of the conscience clause primarily in the Polish law, but also in the international law. Research on the institutional regulation of freedom of conscience will also the military conscience clause, both in the traditional understanding and in relation to the paramilitary groups. The constitutional foundation of the regulation of the military conscience clause will be a pivotal point of the research. The project will include a comparative analysis of the applicable of the conscience clause also with paramilitary groups. The part of the research concerning the pharmaceutical conscience clause will concern the possibility of introducing such legal solutions into a Polish law. Solutions found in the other countries also will be analyzed. A detailed analysis will concern project and postulates for the introduction of such legal solution into Polish law. Preliminary research in my chosen areas allows to the following conclusions. It is worth considering a redefinition of the rules, conditions, and the scope of the conscience clause, and the both parts, in the military and the pharmaceutical law. Considerations should be given to the developing specific guidelines to guide pharmacies in their decision-making in situation of value-based conflict. And consideration should be given to the developing skills to deal with the new ethical issue raised by developments in medicine. It's not the medicine clause, but the pharmaceutical laws, but also, and the level up and the medicine is also very important for me. The occurrence of the moral conflicts generated by concessions objection is still frequently incurred in the pharmaceutical practice. Situations where the moral beliefs of the pharmacist are incompatible with the personal view of the patient cannot be excluded. Nevertheless, it is appropriate to maintain the narrow mirroring of the conscience clause, which does not include members of the pharmacy profession. So there are many observations of the select research topic. This is what I will want to address during my work in the project. I would be happy to listen to the contribution from other members of the team, which may inspire me to the look of the at research in the area of consistent clause in an even different way. Of course, all comments from the member teams on my research are welcome, and I will be grateful for objective view and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. Well, to be honest, this military issue is one of my favorite fields, so I'll be very curious of your researches, and it's also curious to see how far we go for our conscience, what we are ready for to have our conscience prevail. Yeah.
Yes, it's very important nowadays, but I want to look out for the paramilitary groups that we got in the Poland. It's very popular now, the paramilitary groups, more than the military, professional military.
I see.
It's fun to imagine a person who is committing himself to a paramilitary group and then refusing service on the basis of his conscience, but
no, it's possible that the German and the German doctrine and the German they are talking that it's possible. It's possible.
Well, these units are constituted for peace and not for war.
Yeah, but yeah, no, it's very interesting. So I showed this subject for me because it's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting for us, no, because I think it's the other point of view of the closure of the conscience. Yeah, it's a completely other point of view. So I think it's very interesting to do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And next in the alphabet is Balázs next to me. So Balázs, the floor is yours.
Why me? Okay.
Because it's your name's fault.
One of the most interesting documents on conscientious objection, in my mind, is the agreement, the draft agreement between Slovakia and the Holy See. Because Slovakia and the Holy See had a fundamental agreement foreseeing 4 detailed agreements. 2 of them have been signed and ratified. The third one, on conscientious objection, is a draft agreement, in fact, and it failed to move on. The fourth agreement on financial issues is now not on the agenda. But in my mind, this document is of particular interest, not just for our Slovak friends in between us, but generally, is that in this document we have a kind of a legal concept on what conscience should be, or how conscience should be protected according basically to the Catholic doctrine, but it's a legal language and not a theological one. I wonder how I can combine or somehow take this text into consideration. But getting closer to the topic and the research I am planning, and to the topics I would be happy to get feedback on, is first of all a concept of conscientious rights in general. Here, in my observation, conscience there are two different notions on conscience in our legal system. One is a kind of a secular, under quotation marks, a secular and individual kind of religion. Religion is a community phenomenon. You belong to a community, and that is shaping your behavior and taking care of your rights. You have a big community fighting for your rights and trying to make an arrangement in a legal system vis-a-vis a sovereign state or sovereign states. But when it comes to conscience, conscience is always individual, and you are alone vis-a-vis the state. And when we have a belief, a conviction that is as strong as a religious conviction, then it deserves a similar kind of protection than we grant for religious convictions. But we also have another approach to the freedom of conscience, and that is a more general one, basically claiming an integrity or protecting an integrity of the personality. Equally protecting people who share a religious conviction, and people who have other kinds of convictions, but convictions at least. I mean, not just desires or not just ideas on this and that, but convictions that are determining their identity. And I think both approaches, or both both notions have a kind of legitimacy on their place. And we have a set of issues, some of them you have already mentioned this afternoon, a set of issues where we have well-established procedures on respecting conscientious rights. Objection to the military service could be one of these traditional topics. Objection to compulsory vaccination could be another one. Objection to perform certain medical treatments on the side of doctors or medical doctors or pharmacists or whoever. But the notion of conscience it makes it impossible to give an exhaustive list on issues where you need accommodation. Because you can have new issues coming up every day, and we will never get to the end. Of course, we need a kind of a scrutiny or a possibility to control whether a request is truly a genuine conscientious request, and not just kind of a mock or a kind of just someone trying to get a more favorable treatment in a prison or at a workplace or whatever. And there we all face a difficulty, probably how far we can scrutinize that the claim, the conscientious claim, is truly a genuine one, or it is beyond the limits of respect. I mean, this is one side of the issues I think I should be writing on, and the other side is a more institutional one, and I wonder whether this is of a common interest shared by both our Polish colleagues and us, and that is a kind of a drittwirkung issue. How far and how conscientious rights can be protected or have to be protected in institutions run by religious communities. Of course, a religious community, a religious entity running a school, a hospital, an orphanage, a university, whatever, is not the state. It's a kind of a private entity having rights, not being obliged by rights, but enjoying rights. And here on a horizontal level, on the other side, we have an employee who may be very loyal to the employer, but his or her loyalty may have limits. And how far can the employer request, in the legal sense, request the loyalty of an employee, and does this employee have similar conscientious rights than an employee of a public institution? Is there a difference between a school run by the state and a school run by a religious entity, any kind of faith-based organization? This is a traditional equal treatment issue. I assume that the challenge has to be a common one, because we have an EU directive on equal treatment in employment issues, and that EU directive provides for exemptions that have already been in force when the directive was passed, almost 20 years ago. So it had in mind basically the German institutions, well established under German law, that were run by religious entities, and that they should have the right to maintain their character, their tendency, as they say, being institutions that have a specific tendency. Probably the European Court of Human Rights cases on German employees of religious entities are well known. Of Obst and Schütt, a couple of years ago, it was an interesting case in Strasbourg. But I think that it's an issue. It's a field where more and more problems are to come up, and one doesn't need to be a prophet to know that new challenges will come up in this field, as religious entities are working with a growing number of people, and a growing percentage of these people religious entities are working with are not especially pious, or not especially motivated by their religious convictions. They just want to have an employment. What's the difference between a general loyalty of an employee and this specific religious one? So I see in this field a topic that I should be writing on, and I would certainly appreciate receiving any kind of provocations or thought-provoking ideas or comments that could fertilize my interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Balázs. I will be very curious of your findings. I feel personally involved, as I'm a Presbyterian teaching in a Catholic university, so this is absolutely about me. let's move on. So now I kindly ask Zdzislaw to present his views.
Hi, do you hear me? Okay. The subject of my research is analysis issues of conscientious objection, conscience clause in the selective law professions as an element of religious police in Poland. The first, corporate legal professions, bar, barrister, attorneys at law, notary public, and court bailiff. And second, non-corporate legal professionals, judge and prosecutor. So the right to conscientious objections, conscience clause is to be ensuring guarantor. The first, the realization of the universal human right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and second, of the protection of human dignity. And here I can ask the following research questions. Can the lawyers in Poland rely on their conscience when practicing their profession? Can a barrister, attorneys at law, and notary public, a bailiff, a prosecutor, and a judge refer to their own conscience in own work? And if we answer yes positively to his question, then ask another question. Can lawyers in Poland refuse to perform some of their professional activities on the grounds of conscience objection, conscience clause? And another question, or rather a task to be developed by me. It is necessary to analyze the legal provisions in force in Poland. Law relating to the legal profession acts. These are the acts of law such as the Constitution of the Republic of Poland of 1997. I need to analyze international conventions and agreements, Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms of 1950, and Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union of 2000. I must to analyze acts, including acts on the professions of law, corporations, and I must to analyze internal corporate regulations act provisions from the codes of professional ethics. So I ask myself a basic research question. Can a lawyer in Poland directly apply the Polish Constitution of 1997, which in Article 53 guarantees everyone shall be granted freedom of conscience and religion? Another research question is this: can the above-mentioned provision of the Polish Constitution derive the normative basis of the conscience clause of the barrister and other legal professions? I also must ask another question. Is conscience objection, conscience clause, contained individual corporate laws on the legal professions? Act law on the bare Act on attorneys at law, Act of notary law, Act of court beliefs, Act on law on the public prosecutor's office, Act law on the system of common courts. I ask myself, and I will investigate works, is conscience objection contain individual codes of professional ethics adopted by national authorities of corporate legal profession. Codes of professional ethics. Code of ethics for bar, Code of ethics of attorneys at law, Code of professional ethics for notaries, Code of professional ethics for court enforcement offices, collection of rules of professional ethics for judges. It's important that there is no separate set of rules of professional ethics for prosecutors in Poland. My preliminary analysis of the 6 law corporation acts leads to the hypothesis that they don't contain an express legal provision concerning the conscience clause. It's different in legal regulation about the professionals of a doctor, nurse, and pharmacist. So, in my research, I will use various research methods. Linguistic analysis of legal norms, acts and their systematic and dogmatic interpretation. Alternatively, I will use the method of legal and comparative interdisciplinary interpretation. I will refer to the method and analysis of judicial decisions in Poland and courts in Europe. I will refer to the position of science and doctrine. Finally, in my plan, I will present the legal referenda postulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It will be really interesting to see the role of conscience of different professions. Listening to your presentation, and it is also connected to Marta's, I was wondering to what extent you have to be consistent with conscience. So do people have one conscience all their lives, or can they change time to time? That's also another issue. We will all face it during our researches, I think. So, Michal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm just wonder, do we have the place for the discussions and for after my presentation?
Yes, of course. So I think that after your presentation, I will also have some words of my issues, and then we are free to discuss.
All right, all right. I have just a small presentation, and of course, as always, ready to say what I would like to say. Just I would like to try to be sure that presentation is well. See, you see the presentation?
Not yet. Try share screen.
Okay. How about now?
Now it works. Yeah. Wonderful.
So we see the So is it visible?
We lost it.
Okay. How about now?
Nope. I tried it once that if you click on the second from the top, presentation, open the menu.
All right.
And then the second from the top is presentation.
Yes, this is
and
correct.
Then, it is presentation. Oh.
There we have. All right. All right. I would say. I'm sorry.
That doesn't work.
But next time, or maybe after my presentation, oral, Lauren, just give me a few minutes because technical, and we will figure out how I can present in next time.
Michał, if you wanted, it is the third bottom under the line.
Yes.
The
Screen
third bottom.
sharing.
Share the share the window.
I recommend the fourth one. So down to presentation, there is a screen share.
Yeah. Is it the third bottom? Above.
Dobra, i co teraz mam, Marta, zrobić?
Wiesz to co robiłeś, I'm sorry, in Polish. Wiesz to możesz ten trzeci włączyć, albo tak jak zrobiłeś, idealnie zrobiłeś i nie było problemu, tylko ty po prostu zamknąłeś tą prezentację.
Cholera.
Ona była bardzo dobrze zrobiona, tylko ty ją zamknąłeś, nie? Po prostu nie możesz zamykać tego okna, ona u góry będzie taki malutki niebieski pasek.
Dobra, a teraz? Bo teraz włączyłem tą prezentację, nie jest widoczna.
Wiesz to zrób tak jak zrobiłeś ostatnio, tylko nie zamykaj tego niebieskiego okna. Udostępnij prezentację, nie zamykaj, tylko zatrzymaj prezentację i będzie ok.
Okej, dobra, to już teraz tak robię. Czyli to będzie cały ekran, bo tak wtedy zrobiłem.
You are certainly right. I'm wondering that, have you tried this screen sharing?
O, dokładnie tak.
I co teraz? Widać jest?
Now it works.
Tak, teraz będzie, jest, okej, super. I zostaw tak, tylko po prostu przybijaj slajdy.
Okej.
Tak, prezentacja.
Okay, so first of all, I'm pretty sure that I would like to say, and all my research will be about the individual and institutional conscience in the healthcare institutions and in education institutions as well. And of course, first of all, I have some research plan. And of course, this is a plan. And today I will briefly talk about what are the main questions. And thank you for very interesting, meaningful input by Balázs. And at the end, I will put my questions according to my research plan. But first of all, the meaning and the value of the conscience is something very important in Poland, not only from the legal, but also from the theological perspective and from the Catholic perspective as well. And indeed, the new concepts. I think also in Poland, we are in this moment that we need to figure out how we understand the conscience. And this Slovakian case is also interesting, but I don't know much about it, about this new legal concept. But what we observe in Poland is that we are trying to reach the best solution from the legal perspective, from the legal definition. But then I will focus also on the conscience clause and the constitutional law. And what I would like to say now, that in Poland, there is a discussion about the relation between freedom of conscience and freedom of the religion. I mean, what is the real source for the conscience? And of course, we have the answer. I mean, the Constitutional Tribunal, in the famous judgment from 2015, make this distinction. And it's visible and it's clear, but still there is a discussion about it, because the conscience, we easily can say that in Poland, conscience has two independent sources. It could be the freedom of the religion, but also it could be the freedom of conscience. But in those two aspects, there are some consequences. And then I focus on some case law on the freedom of conscience in Poland, because abortion, of course, as always in Poland, is a hot topic, even now after the last judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland. But interesting is what is behind of the judgment. I mean, also the context of arguments is very important, because what we see now, what we observe now, is something which I believe we can call modernization of the secularization. I would say something like that. Even if regular people don't feel it, they are the part of this process of the modernization, of the secularization, of the secular state, of the idea of the secular state. That's why we see different arguments, changing arguments in the different judgments, especially in last judgments about the abortion. Then, what I really would like to explore is balance between the individual conscience and institutional protection, and this is quite interesting in Poland, because individual conscience is well established, but for some of professions, of course, we all hear the previous presentations made by Zdzisław and Marta, but we need to understand that in Poland, individual conscience is something which is still debated. And from the another hand, the people want to be protected from the side of the institutions, from the secular institutions, from the state institutions, and from the religious-oriented institutions as well. And that's why now I truly believe that people are in Poland, they are waiting for some kind of solutions to be more protected from the side of the institution, from the institution which is sharing some kind of values and giving the right protection to them, to the individuals. So, conscience in the healthcare this is what I will focus on, especially in the cases of the abortion, refusing treatment, vaccination, and other. Then conscience in the education, especially in the case of the protection children from the discrimination, treatment, and ideological discrimination in public schools, because secular state somehow is still providing secular values, and very often they are against, let's say, religious values, sometimes even Christian values. And what we see now in the education institutions is that the parents' rights to educate their children according to their convictions is a hot topic, is now problematic. And of course, my research plan at the end should give us the answers, the proposals maybe, but first of all, big and interesting reflection. So the conscience clause, that will be all about in my research plan. Individual rights, of course, in Poland, it's still the concept of the conscience clause is treated as an individual right based on the freedom of the religion or freedom of the conscience. But as my chief, Professor Stanisz, told us, that we still in Poland do not work on properly about the impact of the judgment of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal from 2015, which has strong impact to our current situation. There is a lack of the exploration of this judgment. So I will focus on it according to the direction made by Professor Stanisz, because we need to explore more about this judgment in Poland, and I believe that has strong impact also to the European system. But what is interesting is at the end, what I'm really interested in is the balance between individual conscience and institutional protection. If I have a space, I would like to say that, of course, this is a document, not even a soft law, but the resolution from the European perspective. I would like just to mention that the resolution of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe from 2010 give us something which I would like to mention. In this resolution, we have the clear distinction, we have the clear message that from the one hand, the member states should guarantee the right to conscientious objection in the relation to the participation, the medical procedure. Also, from the other hand, ensure the patients to be informed in a good manner, and also ensure the patients receive appropriate treatment, in particular in cases of the emergency. So there is a tension between moral integrity, indeed. And this is also the Polish case brought to the Constitutional Tribunal a few years ago. This tension is so interesting for me. How we protect, and the open question is, how we protect moral integrity of individual person according to from one hand, right to consciousness objection, and from the another hand, right to maybe give a particular medical treatment to this person, to those individuals. And there is a clash between this guarantee, this right to consciousness objection, in the, for example, in the medical procedure, and between the ensure the patients receive those appropriate treatments, which is the right to health care provided by the state. And also it is the right guaranteed by the Constitution. And another question is how law regulates the right to consciousness objection to hospital or different medical institutions. And what we see in this resolution, that's why I mentioned about this resolution. Because from the another point of view, we see that the hospitals, institutions shall be coerced, held liable because of a refusal to perform or accommodate, assist, or submit, for example, to an abortion, and so on. So, another thing is, before they've decided to make this resolution, which of course has no legal impact. Maybe it's too strong to say like that, but has no legal impact, but some impact still has. So this, in the view of the Council of Europe's member states, the obligation to ensure access to the healthcare services provided by the law. And the Assembly invites member states to rule out the right of institutional consciousness objection, preventing public hospitals or clinics or other institutions to invoke consciousness objection. All right, so, and we also need to note that in France or in Germany, the courts confirmed that the freedom of the conscience is individual, not institutional. And the public institutions are obligated to ensure, for example, women and other people if they are referred to equivalent practitioners in timely manner who do not share such objections and who are within responsible distance in case the chosen healthcare provider refuses to perform certain reproductive health services based on consciousness objection. So, at the end of my presentation and some open questions, I would like to make a deep exploring of the judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal, which was not, was well discussed in Poland, but still not enough. In this judgment, we have something extremely interesting. Of course, this is my personal opinion. This is the translation of one of the arguments used by the Constitutional Tribunal. The doctor's right to invoke the conscience clause in the field of medical law does not result from Article 39 of the Medical Act in Poland, but directly from constitutional provisions and acts of international law. Therefore, there are no grounds for formulating a separate right to consciousness clause, the conscience clause. And consequently, there is no doubt that the legislator cannot arbitrarily shape this privilege or abolish it, but must respect the constitutional conditions for establishing restrictions on the freedoms and rights of people and citizens, according to Article 30 and 31 of our Constitution. So, There are a lot of questions. And I'm very grateful to be the member team of our group, because for now, what I would like to say is I have more questions than answers, and the comparative perspective is something I believe interesting for both sides. But I would like to mention one thing. Still, I think we have something which we called national social background. And I think even if we understand the same definitions, the same problems, even in the same way, still I think the context of our countries is really important to understand, because as I mentioned in this presentation, what we observe in Poland is waiting for the institutional conscience clause. That's what we observe. There is something which I called a social need to do it. And I don't know how is the current situation in Hungary, but this is also important. This has a strong impact to the lawyers, also to the lawmakers. All right, and if I have just 1 minute, I would like just to put maybe 2 questions. Indeed, according to the Balash presentation, I would like to, also to ask how far we really can request the loyalty. This is an open question for all of us. I would like to also ask about it. And I also would like to ask, what is the source of the freedom of conscience? This discussion is still an active discussion in Poland. What is your opinion? What is your answer? Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation, and thank you for highlighting the importance of social background. I'm wondering to what extent conscience is connected to, perhaps bound by, society. And I deeply agree that there's a changing arguments in this field. Balázs was addressed by certain questions. Do you want to answer now or later on? Okay, and finally, allow me to share my slides and some thoughts of what I have in mind. Do you see my slides now?
Yes, we do.
Of course you do, but do the others? I don't see you. I don't see faces. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay.
I do.
Perfect. So, I'm also very glad to have the opportunity to participate in this research group, because when I started to think of our activities and drafting our research concept, I realized how little I know of conscience. So now this is the time to gather my thoughts on conscience and the freedom of conscience. My approach is slightly different to yours, as I like to start not from a particular problem, a particular issue, but the notion of conscience itself. And of course, I try to be pragmatic and practical, so I will conclude to some particular problems. I'll put the question what conscience really is, and I looked up the definition of Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it says that conscience is the sense or consciousness of the moral goodness or blameworthiness of one's own conduct, intentions, or character, together with a feeling of obligation to do right or be good. So it is to sense the moral goodness. But if we accept this definition, there are many other questions we need to put. Therefore, I made a map on the problems. If conscience is the sense of morality, then we need to put the question if morality is universal. This is a very interesting psychological, perhaps theological issue, and people have different answers for that. But even if we say that there is a universal morality, well, I believe, but still there's a question if we interpret it the same way. Do we sense morality the same way? And the obvious answer is that we don't. So either way, either we believe in a universal morality or not, we conclude that individual conscience of people are different. It is so various that we cannot have one individual conscience. It is deeply connected to the individual. If it is the case that our conscience might be different, then it happens, and we are discussing, all of us are discussing this issue, that conscience may conflict the general rule. That the law says something, it binds us to do certain things, and it might be contradictory to our conscience. And now comes the question, if the law provides objections, can I say no to the general rule? If not, this is not the freedom of conscience yet, because this is an extra legal issue. This is out of the field of law. If the law does not provide any objection, then we are in the Antigone dilemma. We all know the classical Greek drama when Antigone faces the problem that her conscience dictates different activity than the law, the order of the king. This is an extra legal issue. This is not freedom of conscience because the law does not provide any objection. But if it does, then comes another question, what Balázs mentioned, if there is any scrutiny. Is the objection tested? And if it does, there's another question, if the objection is approved or not. And if it does not, we are back to the Antigone dilemma. And if it does approved or it is not tested at all, then we come to the issue of freedom of conscience. And this is quite an interesting issue because freedom of conscience is a well-known fundamental right for constitutional law. This is a legal institution. So this is not an extra legal issue any longer, but something the law provides us against the law. So this is paradox in a sense, because the law provides exemption from itself. And when we analyze freedom of conscience, then there's also a great variety. First, we need to put the questions, is conscience against the law or not? There are some cases when there is a choice of several ways, several options, all legal. Let's say that we've already heard the example of like special diet in prisons. It is not illegal to avoid eating pork, for example, for Jews and Muslims. But still, it is an issue if the prison provides the possibility of such diet. Or in Britain, it is possible for Muslim ladies to have passport photos in a veil. Others don't. But if you are a Muslim lady, then you can keep your veil on while making a passport photo. But it is not possible to wear a hijab or a niqab, only a veil. This is also this issue that wearing a veil is legal, but the question arises if you can wear it during you are photoed, when you are photoed for a passport. Or my favorite topic, that if vaccination can be substituted with some things. All examples I mentioned now are examples for the case when there are several options, all legal, and the question is that if you are free to choose one of them because of your conscience. But there are some other issues when conscience is against the law. Then the example for that was also Balázs's example, that using some Indian tribes in North America are allowed to eat the hallucinogene mushrooms, while for others it is a criminal offense because it's using drugs. There's another test you need to decide issues like that. So it's quite obvious that you need a test to decide if conscience prevail or the general rule. And it might be very interesting in some cases, because now comes the social expectation Michal already mentioned. Another example for that is that in Britain and in many European countries, female genital mutilation is not accepted. That is a criminal offense to do it for your child, even if it is by conscience. On the contrary, circumcision is accepted. So it's up to the society if they accept the objection or not. And as a constitutionalist, we need to say that there must be an objective test to decide whether conscience prevails or not. So if it is not accepted, we are back to the Antigone dilemma. And if it is, then this is the objection by conscience. And that would be the core of my book chapter. And I will make deductions from specific legal problems. And the other question is that whose conscience we are talking about. This research project is about freedom of conscience in an institutional aspect. Still, by definition, conscience is for human beings because it is closely connected to dignity, and they are only the human beings who may have conscience. And it's a question, when we institutionalize conscience, is it the conscience of the institution, the organization itself, or is it a collective conscience? I mean, the conscience of the individuals, which dictates which? I don't know the answer yet, but I'm very curious to examine the issue. And of course, there are cases when conscience manifests in different fundamental rights, like in education or the access to healthcare and things like that. And my other question is if we need to differentiate issues when the activity is connected to a fundamental right and all other activities by conscience. And it is also a possibility when collective and individual conscience are in conflict. What are the tests upon which we can solve the problem, we can answer the question. So I agree with Michal. I'm quite in the same position, that I have much more questions than answers, and much more questions than when I had when I started thinking of the issue. This will be a long journey to answer the question, but according to an English idiom, it is better to travel hopefully than to arrive. I enjoy the ride with you approaching the idea, the freedom of conscience. Thank you for your attention. Now we're back. Okay. So, well, all of us had expressed their views. We still have some time for questions and answers. So if you have any question concerning the presentations, then feel free to ask. Or we can do it later on, of course. Just one remark that I'm working on establishing a platform for to which we can all upload files and put questions and things like that. That is more efficient than writing emails. I will fix it next week. So that will be another possibility for us to exchange views. Adam has questions, and Balázs was addressed with questions. So first, Adam.
Thank you very much, Laurent. To be honest, I'm a little bit doubtful because last time I made some in-depth, semi-structured interviews with judges and with some other participants of administrative court proceedings related to that certain issue that was court mediation, and at least three of you mentioned different groups, for example, employees of paramilitary organizations. Then Zdzislav, if I pronounce correctly your name, was speaking about different law professions, selected law professions, and so on. And it came to my mind, what do you think about having some interviews? And to be honest, it took really much time to conduct those at about 10 or 12 interviews. So I feel a little bit overwhelmed when I'm speaking about that on the one hand, but on the other hand, it would be helpful to get even some interviews. Michal mentioned that it's important to know the social background, the contemporary situation, not only from the books and from reading the primary legal sources, but also having some empirical things. So that's my question, and it's not addressed only to you, but it's a question for myself as well. So I wanted to share this thought with you. Thank you.
May I?
Sure.
Well, it's of course each and every researcher has his or her special preferences for certain methods and beyond. But I'm always scared when students approach me on focusing on interviews and conducting empirical research and things like that, because by nature they can never be empirical. That's another that belongs to another field expertise of other social sciences, but not ours. Where we have a kind of empiria is the case law. When we have a case law, when claims have arrived to courts, of course, on the one hand, our ideas and our sense for dangers may be theoretical, just where we fear that problems may arise. We have seen challenges abroad, and we assume that the same will happen in our countries sooner or later. And the other approach is that, well, when we already have a case law and we already have legal debates, and not only occasionally but on a large scale, and then we have to react to that in a way or another. So I respecting other methodologies, I myself will never do any kind of an empirical research or interviews, but it's I certainly have nothing against anyone else doing so. To the question of Michal, it's I think we would all share a kind of general principle of agire contra factum proprium, or venire contra factum proprium. So once you have committed yourself in a private law obligation to a certain behavior, to a certain act, to a certain conduct, then next day you shouldn't refuse to do so. I decided to sell my car, and then next day I come up, well, my conscience prevents it to sell it to that person, or I've signed an agreement to conduct a kind of a work, and then I come up that, well, I don't want to do that. The nasty example I would have never given was one of my colleagues saying that a prostitute cannot say that, well, she wouldn't undress. It was against her conscience. It's I would never. I would have never said that. But it's
That was me.
But the question is that to put it in simple, understandable, and nasty words, I think when someone works at an abortion clinic, then he can't say that I don't take part in abortions. But there shall be a possibility in a country where abortion is not illegal. There shall still be a possibility for a gynecologist to get a public employment and still refusing to take part in abortions. Because, I mean, when you are a soldier, you can't say that, no, I'm only a soldier as long as there is peace, and I will never touch weapons. But once you are to stuck with this very concrete example, a gynecologist, to the profession of a gynecologist, taking part in abortions is not inevitable. Doesn't belong to the very core of the job. It's many other things do. Well, he will see a naked woman and etc. etc. But not that very conduct. So I think a kind of reasonability test has to be applied, and old Roman legal principles can always help us finding a reasonable answer.
Connectedly, I would say that from the institutional aspect, it is different to say from the state perspective that because of your conscience you cannot work in an abortion clinic, then because of your conscience you cannot be a doctor. They are two different things. So they are all conscience objections, but it is determined by the very circumstances.
Because a side effect or a consequence of doing it in the other way around would be that from certain professions, those who I mean would seek a certain kind of service will not find the people of their own belief in those branches. So Poland is certainly different in this respect as Hungary, but in Hungary, Catholics, Catholic gynecologists would be practicing Catholic gynecologists would be a rare example, a rare exemption, and you would it would be a profession basically left to agnostics, and for well, a practicing Catholic mother, it would be a preference to go to a doctor who is not a who she wouldn't regard as a murderer, or and who would have a similar understanding on the right to life as she does, which is not the case in general in our country.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, if not, then thank you for your attendance today. I switched